All right.
All right, today we are in the home of Vonnie Myers, a longtime resident of Lenoir City. We're going to talk about some of his memories growing up here in Lenoir City, all the way through the Highland Park Ruritan Club. So, first of all, thank you so much for meeting with me today.
Welcome to my home, Darrell.
It's beautiful. And so, let's go ahead before we do the Highland Park stuff. Off camera, we've been talking about a lot of memories that I had no clue about. And so, tell me about your background growing up.
Well, I was the youngest of 8 kids. They were, we lived over in Fountain when I was just a kid, right there next to the cemetery, and I spent a lot of time in the cemetery. Most time at my age, I was in their way, but I thought I was helping, and they made me feel like I was helping, sometimes as a little boy. And but that's where we was at. And I was born in '39, and we moved up here on Pine Top in 1947. So my first 8 years was over there. But going back further than that, I was born not far from where I live now. I live here on Pine Top, as you know, and we've been here since '47. This was the original house. I built onto it a few years later, after Mom and Dad, I built onto it pretty good. And so I've been here, but I was born, I could go out here on my back porch, and if somebody was standing on their back porch down there where I was born, they could hear me holler at them. I was born right on the property where the city hall is now.
Okay.
Here in Lenoir City, our government building there. I had an uncle lived there, and my mom happened to be there with a couple of my brothers, and she went into labor. I was there. Well, most everybody had their babies at home then. There were very few people, I guess, went to the hospitals, from what I understand. And I know all 8 of us was born at home, and I was born in my uncle's house, and his name happened to be Vonnie. And that's not a name that you hear often.
Right.
But his name was Vonnie, but he was a preacher, and he went by the name of Have. And he was always just Uncle Have Hill. And so that's the way I became Vonnie Myers, was I was named after my Uncle Have Hill.
And so you went to Highland Park School.
Went to Highland Park School. It took me biggest part of 10 years, as best I remember, to get through 8 years up there. But I walked every day.
Red-shirted, huh?
Well, I started out trying to go to Highland Park School when we lived in Fountain. But I wouldn't stay. I'd slip off, come back home. And finally, Miss Sadie Porter was the principal. And Miss Porter, I remember her coming to our house. And she finally decided it might be best if I just wait till I'm 7 years old and start the first grade.
Yeah.
Well, I asked her since I was going to wait a year, could I start second? She said no. So I started the first, and I failed the first grade at 7 years old. And I started back the next year, still living in Fountain. I was 8 years old. And I guess they felt like I was a little too smart for them 6-year-olds. And they advanced me to the second grade, and I failed the second grade. So that's actually the truth. I spent 10 years getting 8th grade education at Highland Park School. So,
But were there any teachers there that really made a difference in your life, that made an impact?
well, Miss Sadie Porter, as our principal, made an impact in my life. At that time, best I can remember, every teacher we had in the middle 40s there was ladies. Miss Josephine Fout. My first teacher, her name was Ballantyne with a B, Miss Ballantyne. Don't know what ever happened to her. Miss Sadie Porter and Miss Fout both lived up on 3rd Avenue behind the post office. They lived about half a block apart. And I remember we had a lady by the name of Miss Hull. And of course, a lot of the grades, one teacher taught
Right.
multiple grades, So best of my recollection, in 45, 46, we probably only had about 5 teachers at Highland
Okay.
Park School, and that was for all 8 grades, you
Right.
know. Of course, there wasn't no such thing as kindergarten. You know.
Right, no,
We didn't have
no.
nothing like that at that time, you know.
So then you went on to Lenoir City High School?
I went to Lenoir City High School, and I went there in 1955, I guess, or 54. Went to Lenoir City High School, and played basketball my freshman year in football.
Okay.
And me and Richard Pickle was a guard on the freshman team. Roy Wright was a center. Bill Bolton and Wayne Anthony was the forwards on that freshman team.
Mm-hmm.
We never lost a game. I dropped out of school. I was old enough. I dropped out of school in my sophomore year and worked a little while at Russell Dury and joined the Navy.
Mm-hmm.
And I came back on a GI Bill later on and continued at Roan State for a little bit, and I got my GED there, and then took a few classes at Roan State. But what I'm saying is, them boys that I played basketball with on that freshman team went ahead and won the state championship
That was the
in
58?
1958 team,
Yeah.
Along with, of course, they graduated in 59, every one I'm telling you there.
Mm-hmm.
But 3 of them was starters on that 58
What
team,
about
you
that?
know. So I missed an opportunity, that comes once
Lifetime.
a lifetime, you know, to get to being a part of a state championship basketball team. But a lot of good friends right there.
Yeah.
We made friends, really good friends all not their life.
But
Most of them's dead now.
is Richard passed?
Richard's passed. Roy Wright, Bill Bolton, 2 of the best friends I ever had, they passed.
Mm.
And Harry Wilkerson was a starting guard on that state championship team, and he passed. Dan Barton and Preston Allen, as far as I know, are both living.
Okay.
I'm sure Preston is, but I don't know about Dan, but they were both starters on that team.
Do either one live in Lenoir City?
I think that Preston Allen lives in Tellico Village. I think
Okay.
I played a little golf with him
Uh-huh.
after he was gone from Lenoir City for a while, and I don't really know, but I'm pretty sure Preston still lives in Lenoir City.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about your Navy career.
Well, it was a short career.
Okay.
I left here in 1957 on New Year's Eve, and I was sworn in the Navy in Nashville and got on a train. Had a little old light jacket on that you'd wear here in the fall of the year, but it's probably the only one I had. I wore that, and we got on a train in Nashville that night about 9 o'clock and got in Great Lakes, Illinois on New Year's morning, 1958. And it was 14 below zero, and I about froze to death. I did end up with pneumonia while I was in boot camp, and had to, after 3 weeks with one company, I had to, in the hospital while I had to start back with another company, so it took me a while to get through boot camp, like it did Highland Park School. I was in the hospital there a couple of weeks, but anyway, after that I went to Radio School Command in Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
And I was there until November. And my dad had a stroke, and me being the youngest of the family, somebody had to come back home and take care of Dad. The rest of my brothers had jobs and families out of state. None of them lived here. So I came back. I got an early honorable discharge. Came back to Tennessee and stayed in the reserves, and took care of my mom and dad till they passed away in 75 and 76.
Okay, okay. Well, off camera we were also talking about, you were bringing up a lot of places that I didn't know existed here. So if you'd share your memories about the Jockey Lot, where it was located.
Yeah, well, of course, you hadn't heard about the Jockey Lot.
Right.
But the Jockey Lot was on B Street, and it sits exactly where the Memorial Building sits today. And that's exactly what it was a Jockey Lot. Now everybody, there was some cars, don't get me wrong, there were cars. People went to town in cars. But they was probably still 15–20% of the people out in the country didn't have cars. We went into town, and we also did, with a little horse and a wagon Dad called a hack. It wasn't a great big wagon. I never heard anybody else call them a hack. But we had a horse named Prince, and we would go into town every other Friday, and we'd go to that Jockey Lot, and that's where you parked. And people would be on that Jockey Lot. Of course, you'd park there, and the women could just walk across the alley and walk in the back of OK Grocery, A&P, White Store, and go right out on Broadway, you know. Emery's Five and Dime was there. Wilburn Hardware was there that time. So they could just walk across the back alley and go through the stores like a mall right out on Broadway, you know.
Now, was this in the 40s?
This was in the 40s and the early 50s.
Okay.
Yes, sir. Up to the early 50s. And most of the time when the women was doing that, the men was out there on the Jockey Lot. They were jockeying. They might be, some of them might have goats to sell. They might be trading knives. They might be trading roosters. They might even be trading a horse or a wagon for another horse, wagon or something. They'd jockey back and forth, you know, dickering on the price of stuff.
Yeah, hence the Jockey Lot.
Yeah, and they'd be standing around and whittling and chewing their tobacco, just really having a good time while the women was doing a little shopping.
Yeah, that's great.
That's where the Jockey Lot was. It was right there where the Memorial Building was.
But how about the Blacksmith Shop?
Yeah, the Blacksmith Shop would have been in the 300 block of East Broadway. It was on the north side of Broadway, and it set just a little piece off the street, sort of almost to the back of the lot back there. It was just a little old building, little old wood building, and had a couple of old, looked like a little garage, but it was a blacksmith shop. And best of my recollection, and I'm 90% sure I'm correct, it was Wilkerson that owned it. And I know there was some Wilkersons lived at the back of it at the corner of Rock Springs Road and First Avenue. But anyway, that's where the blacksmith shop was. And now I've never talked to anybody that remembered that blacksmith shop being there. But I remember going with my dad. Of course, I was just a kid in the late 40s. I remember taking our horse and wagon down there and having the horse shoed or shod. And I think they call it fire ears now that does that. But back then, it was just a blacksmith. And they put new shoes on old Prince, and they put new rims on the wooden wheels, you know, metal iron rims on it. So it sat right there, and then I don't know, I'd say that it was gone probably, Darrell, I'd say it was gone probably in the early 50s, it had to be, and soon after it closed, there was a monument company there.
Okay.
That's the first monument company that I ever heard of or saw around Lenoir City. And I do remember that B.F. White, Barry White's dad, owned that monument company. And he worked out of that little building, but he had the monuments on display out there in the gravels and all between it and Broadway, you know, where I said the building sat back on the back of the lot a little. He had 15 to 20 tombstones sitting out there where he sold them. And Clarence Wilson, CA, his dad went to work for Mr. White.
So that's how he got into the business.
Yeah, that's the way the monument company started in Lenoir City.
Yeah.
The best of my recollection, there was never, somebody bought monuments before that, but I don't know where, you know.
Right.
And that's the way the monument company, and then, of course, later on, then Mr. Wilson went up on Highway 70 after Mr. White closed up, or Highway 11 up just above Old Stage Road there on Highway 11. He went up there, started monument coming in. I don't know whether he called it Lee High Monument at that time or Lee Heights. I don't know whether he called it that or just called it Wilson Monument or what, but then
And they've been successful for a long time.
they've been successful. Very good people, does
Yeah.
a good job for Loudon County.
And then, you know about the Lakeview Cemetery origin. Tell me about that.
Yeah, now of course, I don't know if anybody would be interested in how a cemetery came to life. Is that what you call it? Come to life, a cemetery? But anyway, it was a sage-grass hillside. That's all it was. It was just a sage-grass hill. Well, we lived right here, and I would say, Darrell, that I was probably 13, 14 years old. Now, I could be off a year or two either way. But I'd say that was about when this happened. And I told you, my first 8 years of my life was over there around the cemetery with the people that done the work, kept it mowed, dug the graves. And Mr. Cobb owned Cobb's Clothing Store. At that time, Cobb's Clothing Store was next door to Rexall Drug Store. On the south side of Broadway would have been 202 or 204 building there. 100 or 102 or 104, not 200, across the street from our furniture store. He had a clothing store there, Mr. Cobb did. But Mr. Cobb was the secretary for the Lenoir City Cemetery. He's the one, if you wanted to buy a lot, if you wanted to know where the lot was at, you make payments on the lot or anything. And Mr. Dunlap was up at the cemetery taking care of the work. Mr. Cobb, of course, paid Mr. Dunlap, and he hired the people and fired the people, and he took care of the cemetery. So he would let me work over at the cemetery as I grew up, and I could make 60 cents an hour at the cemetery, or if I helped out Glenn Hewins or Raymond Phillips or anybody on their farm, I made 50 cents an hour. So I'd rather work the cemetery. And Mr. Cobb would let me do that. Well, we was living here on Pine Top, and like I say, it's probably 51, 52, probably. He came here one afternoon and asked Dad if he could use me for a while that afternoon. Of course, Dad said yes. And we got in his car, and I'm not even sure that I'd ever seen Fort Loudon Dam before that time. But we drove over to Fort Loudon Dam and went over the hill towards where the city park is now. And I guess the city park, since the dam was there, maybe they would have done started that city park. I don't remember. But there was a little old boat dock there where Calhoun's is, and it was just a little old wooden pier went out there in the water, 5 or 6 little old fishing boats. That's all it was.
Wow. Well,
we went on by there, and we turned left in a sage-grass field. And I thought, I have no idea what we're doing or where we're going. And just me and Mr. Cobb, and what a good man Henry Cobb was. And we drove back there in the northeast corner of that field, pretty close to where the mausoleum is now, but just a little bit north of it. We drove right back there in the corner of that property, and he opened his trunk, and we got out a tape measure. See me like it was a 50-foot tape measure, and we got out some twine to pull a string and some stakes. And my job was, where he told me to drive it, was to drive a stake and hold a line. And we'd measure that, and he'd make notes in his book. And we laid off, me and Mr. Cobb did, the first dozen or so lots in that cemetery. Now that's the only day I ever worked in Lakeview Cemetery in my life, was that day. And I had no idea it was even going to be a cemetery till we got done.
is there?
Measure. I had no idea what we was doing.
Did you ever run across Lamb's Eye daily?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I knew Lamb's Eye. You know, I never talked to Lamb's Eye a lot, but I did know Lamb's Eye.
He dug graves for clicks, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and he done work for. I'll tell you one little thing about Lamb's Eye.
Okay.
Joanne had an insurance officer in Lenoir City, and this was years later. This was in the 70s. Joe had an insurance officer in Lenoir City, and Joe had moved out in Harrison Hills. And I would stop at Joe's insurance office some. I was down the street one block down in the furniture business. And Joe would stop at my store, and I was out there one day, and his phone rang. It was a neighbor of his. And Joe had Lamb's Eye out there cutting down a little old tree in his yard. It was just a small tree, maybe 10 feet high and big around his arm or something, you know. But anyway, I don't know why he wanted it cut down, but Lamb's Eye worked for Joe a little bit. And he was out there cutting down that tree. And the neighbor called Joe and said, "How come you'd have Lamb's Eye out here cutting down my tree?" Well, Joe didn't know exactly what was going on. And the neighbor told him, he said, "He cut down my tree." And anyway, I don't remember all their conversation. It wasn't heated or anything. But about 15 minutes later, I was still there, and Lamb's Eye came in Joe's insurance office. And Joe asked Lamb's Eye, he said, "Lamb's Eye, how come you go over and cut down the neighbor's tree?" He said, "Well, I thought that's the one you wanted cut down." Joe said, "No, I had a string around the one that I wanted you cut down." He said, "I thought that string around that was telling me not to cut it." He said, "I cut that other, and it was just over there next to it." And Joe said, "Well, it belonged to my neighbor. He didn't want that cut." He said, "I don't see why it mattered. It wasn't under a little old water bush." I don't know what it was. He said it was just a little water bush.
That's good.
Oh, Lamb's Eye, he was a character. Lenoir City had a lot of characters.
Did they?
They had a lot of them over the years. All right.
You got into the furniture business.
Yeah.
Once you came back from the Navy, and
I did.
Tell me about how you got into the furniture business and your.
When I came back, I got back here. It was right at the end of November, and of course I needed a job. Back in, if you wasn't in school, you worked. That's all it was to it. You worked if you was a boy or a man, and I wasn't much past the boy stage even then. But anyway, I had a brother that was he worked at Caterpillar Tractor Company in Peoria, two of them, and they was in here for a few months, and they had just settled their strike in Peoria at Caterpillar Tractor Company, and he was going back up there in a few days, and he been helping them out at Munger Furniture Company, delivering furniture, setting up furniture, laying linoleum and stuff, you know. He'd been doing that while he was laid off up there. So they hired me for 2 weeks. They give me a job, said, "We're $35 a week. We'll guarantee you 2 weeks' work through Christmas." And my intentions was, after that 2 weeks, was to go to work for Mr. Wamper out at Wamper's Packing Company. And anyway, that 2 weeks turned into 29 years at Munger Furniture Company. Mr. Allen Hall and Mr. Albert Munger at that time owned it. When I went there, and they were super good people. They'd been in that store. Mr. Munger had been there since 24. Mr. Hall had been there since 27. And I enjoyed working for them. And every time that I thought about leaving, they made it more important to me to stay there, you know. And I liked to work for the men. They were good people.
Was that the first furniture store in Lenoir City?
Oh, no. When I went to work there, we had Pickle furniture, we had Ash furniture, we had Thomas Talent furniture, and Munger. I know we had 4.
Wow.
And it wasn't too many years after that, the Lanham started. And of course, somewhere around that time, Mr. Pickle, he closed his store. But Victor Ash and Thomas and Talent Thomas Talent was up on A Street. And at that time, when it was Thomas Talent, the way it was, and a lot of the towns, even after I started traveling years later, selling furniture, I'd still go in some small towns, and it would still be that way. They might have two adjoining buildings, or one big building with partition in the middle of it. On one side it'd be furniture, and the other side funeral home. And that's the way Thomas Talent was. Primarily back then, the people in these factories that built furniture, they built caskets. Well, Mr. Talent had the funeral home, and Virgil and Cecil were brothers. Virgil and Cecil Thomas were brothers, and they had the furniture store. Had a big entrance between the two of them, or joint opening between the two stores. So they worked together as Thomas Talent Furniture. And I'm there again, I'm guessing it must have been maybe in the early 50s, Mr. Talent moved out, and they used all the building after that for furniture till it burned down. And it probably burned down in the late 70s. And Mr. Talent went down and built beautiful funeral home across from the post office where Victory Temple Church is now. He went down and built that. And that's about the time, Darrell, that's about the time, within a year or so of that, Glenn Click and Polly came from Cleveland to Lenoir City and went to work for Mr. Talent.
So that's where the Clicks got their start.
Yes. Yeah, it was. So I stayed at the furniture store till 1987. I really enjoyed it. Just super good people that traded with me, and good friends, still so many of them good friends till today. They were loyal and they were honest. And that's two things that's really hard to find today.
Oh yeah.
Is loyalty and honesty. But boy, they were. And we were friends. And I stayed there until, until things changed. West Knoxville moved this away. Ladies wasn't staying at home so much, and a lot of them was working, and they went back and forth to Knoxville. We had Golden Corral and Corral West, and they had a lot of things in Knoxville. We didn't offer in Lenoir City, so people go up there and eat, and they got to do a lot of shopping up there. Lenoir City got to sort of drying up a little bit.
Now, tell us where the exact location was of your furniture store.
It was 105 East Broadway. It was sort of diagonally across the street from Rex Hall Drugstore and the Grand Theater. We were straight across the street from the old Grand Theater.
Okay, what is there now?
Where I was at,
yeah.
That's Dane Ogden, is that his name? The Allstate Insurance Agent.
Okay.
And it was 105 East Broadway.
Okay.
On the corner above us, on the corner, 101 East Broadway, was Moore's Drugstore. And then Pee Wee Allen had the next door, 103. She had a ladies' apparel shop there, really upgraded. And on the east side of us was US 5 and Dime.
Yeah, yeah. Because if you were from Loudon, and if you got to go to Lenoir City on a Saturday, that was big doings.
Oh yeah. And then our furniture store was 105, but like I say, the 5 and Dime was 107, and then Thomas Hill Men's Clothing was 109. We had upstairs over both of those.
Okay.
So we had a pretty good sized furniture store. We had about 100 by 120 upstairs and 30 by 120 downstairs. And of course, we had a staircase, 21 steps. The first day I went to work there, I climbed them steps. The first day I counted that, and I've always counted things. If I'm in your house and you've got ceiling tiles in it, I'll probably know how many ceiling tiles you got in that house before I leave. I just can't help from counting everything. And I counted them steps, and there's 21 of them. And I was back down there here a year or so ago, and I went upstairs just to look around. There's still 21 steps.
Still 21.
But now we did have a freight elevator.
Yeah.
And we used it sometime for customers. but we had to pull it up. Had a big gigantic wheel up there, and we had weights to counterbalance that, and we would, if we had a load on it, we'd pull it up hard, according to how heavy your load was, how hard you had to pull it. If it was empty, you could let the brake off and it would float up.
Really?
And if you was upstairs bringing a heavy load down, take the brake off, it'd float down. But if it was empty, it was as hard to pull down as it was to...
Now, tell me the story of how you bought the company.
Well, Mr. Munger, I believe he died in '64. And Mr. Munger, he really took a liking to me. And his wife, Stella, well, we was just all, it was sort of like family. I guess I made them a good hand. I done my job. And they respected me, and they were good to me, and they trusted me. And after Mr. Munger died, Ms. Munger wanted me to be a part of it. So she sold me 1/12. Mr. Munger still owned 2/3, and of course that was 8/12. And Mr. Hall owned 1/3, which was 4/12. And Ms. Munger sold me one of her 8/12. And Mr. Hall's health had started to decline. He had had a heart attack a year or two after that. And I became the store manager. I was already doing most of the book work, the ledger book. I was doing most of the buying, most of the selling, and dealt with most of the customers all the time. And Mr. Hall became more limited all the time, the hours he could spend in the store, you know, after his heart attack. So Ms. Munger decided then, if I was interested, she'd sell me enough to make me an equal partner. So she sold me the other 3/12. I became an equal partner and the manager. And I remained doing that, and Mr. Hall was still in most of the days of the week, 3 or 4 hours. And after he passed away, of course, I ran it on as equal partners. They got their dividends, and I got mine, and then they decided that maybe that I'd earned the right at their age, and they had no family who was that interested in it or had any knowledge of furniture, and they decided if I wanted to buy it, they would sell me each one of their thirds. So that's the way, I guess it was probably there 77, 78, something like that I bought. And then from then on it was my furniture store. And the last few years I changed the name of it to Myers Discount Furniture. And that's what it was when I closed it in '87. But everybody still thought of it, still does today, as Munger, because it was Munger Furniture for all those 70-some years. And it was only Myers Furniture for a few years.
Well, I know one thing that outside of your family that you hold very dear, and that is public service. And you were a part of a group, I believe, in 1967.
1967.
That started the Highland Park Ruritan Club. So tell me how that process got underway. Who gave you the idea?
Well, now the way that Highland Park Ruritan Club became organized, at that time, service was really important, you know, to communities. It was important to the people. People took the time to be a part of those. And Ruritan had started in Holland, Virginia